Chemicals serve many different and important purposes in our world. Today, industrial chemical companies are responsible for the proper testing of these chemicals before they go on the market. But experts say that doesn't always happen. As a result, every year thousands of people are injured due to exposure to toxic chemicals. And lawyers like James Ferraro of Miami-based Ferraro Law Firm are sometimes the last, and in many cases, the only line of defense they have to hold chemical companies accountable.
The EPA is there to permit products to go on the market after review, but they don't actually police the products and what happens after that. So people rely on trial lawyers when they get injured to go after corporations for improper behavior.
Castillo versus DuPont is the first case ever successfully prosecuted against a chemical company for causing a birth defect.
The result of that particular case was Mrs. Castillo's son, John, was born with no eyes. And she was sprayed by a fungicide. She lived near a farm, and she was walking by the farm, and a tractor was spraying, and the wind shifted, and she was enveloped with the spray. She was approximately 7 to 10 weeks pregnant at the time, which is exactly when the eyes develop in an unborn embryo.
Ferraro says one of the factors that helped decide the case was critical scientific studies being admissible in court.
One of the issues that you have in the courtroom today is that a corporation like DuPont submits scientific data to the EPA to get their product on the market. And then when you try to use the very same science in court against DuPont, they seek to exclude it, which should not be allowed. Because if you submit something to the EPA to get your product on the market, it should be admissible in court, and it should be up to a jury to decide whether it's good or bad science. Furthermore, they should not be submitting bad science to the EPA in the first place.
In addition, Ferraro also says the trial included complex hearings on highly technical scientific issues of the potential risks of benlate exposure.
There were animal studies, there were in vitro studies on human cells, we had dermal skin transmission studies. I'll tell you about like the animal studies. There's an animal study done in California at the University of California where they tested pregnant rats with the very same chemical Mrs. Castillo was exposed to. And in that study, over 40% of the rat offspring were born with no eyes or other ocular abnormalities. Okay? That was very significant. Aside from that, DuPont had their own data that showed what the transmission rate is through human skin. And we also tested at the cell level with the in vitro studies, which showed what level you need to get cell death, which in turn causes malformations. In this particular case, you've got something called near-right retraction at 3 parts per billion, which is a very, very small amount. At 22 parts per billion, you had cell death, which clearly causes the malformation. And in the case of Mrs. Castillo, her exposure was in the hundreds, if not thousands, of parts per billion.
After 6 weeks of trial, the jury returned a $4 million verdict against DuPont, and a few years later, DuPont removed the product from the market.
It was very significant for the Castillo family because their son had special needs. He needed to go to special schools for the blind, like Perkins, that type of school. And they didn't have the money to do that. They were not wealthy people. So the verdict for them personally was very, very significant. As to the law in general, it was very significant because it was the first verdict in the world against a chemical company for a birth defect ever. And to this day, it still is. The case today is viewed as very significant in the state of Florida, because that's where the trial took place here in Miami. And it went all the way through the appellate system to the Florida Supreme Court. And the decision that was handed down by the Florida Supreme Court took a couple of years to render, but it was a 40-page decision which governs science in the courtroom. So that particular decision is the Bible, so to speak, on science in the courtroom.
Ferraro says the battle over science was a key reason many lawyers initially turned down the case.
Well, the case was turned down by other lawyers because it is so expensive to prosecute. When you go against DuPont, you're going to be spending over 7 figures. You're going to be in the 7 figures in cost. And the lawyer or the law firm has to lay that out on behalf of the client and recover it only if you win. So that's a big issue. That eliminates 99.99% of all lawyers out there. Secondly, you need to find someone who specializes in going after chemical companies or drug companies. So that, again, eliminates 99.9% of lawyers. So you come down to a very small fraction of the population of lawyers that could even take a case like that or even attempt a case like that. And then furthermore, there'd never been a verdict against a chemical company for a birth defect.
Many experts are now recommending federal law require that scientific studies provided to government agencies such as the EPA be admissible in all courtroom proceedings.
Just doing it the way I did, slugging it out in court, it may take a century to change it. So the easiest and most efficient way would be to lobby Congress, the House and the Senate, to pass a bill that specifically states that anything that is submitted to a governmental agency for registration purposes is admissible in court. So I intend on lobbying myself, members of Congress, probably start with the Senate, and explain the situation and hopefully get a law passed.
As one of America's leading trial lawyers, James Ferraro's focus has and will always be to continue the fight for the rights of all people and unborn children.
I've been very fortunate in my career. I've had very good results for my clients, which in turn has earned them a lot of recoveries that in turn has made me enough money that I can prosecute these cases. So as long as I have the ability financially and intellectually to go after these cases and work these cases, I'm going to do it.
If you or someone you love have been harmed by toxic chemicals or dangerous products that cause birth defects, illness, or fatal disease, trusted attorneys at Ferraro Law Firm will be on your side to protect and defend your rights. To learn more about Ferraro Law Firm, visit ferrarolaw.com or call 800-275-3332. Trial lawyers protecting your rights.